Imagine being the most powerful man on earth, surrounded by an army of 50,000 loyal soldiers, standing behind stone walls 40 feet thick, yet feeling a cold, paralyzing sweat break across your forehead because you know with absolute certainty that you are already dead. What if I told you that the most terrifying force in human history didn't conquer with massive siege engines, thundering cavalry, or vast empires, but with a single, blood-stained blade and a psychological secret so profoundly evil it makes modern brainwashing look like child's play? You have heard the word assassin 1,000 times in movies and games, but you have never heard the true, bone-chilling reality of the secret code that allowed a handful of men to bring the entire Middle East to its knees without ever fighting a single open battle. I promise you, by the end of this journey, you will not just learn history, you will feel the cold steel against your own neck. I am going to reveal the exact psychological trick that turned ordinary young men into unfeeling, suicidal ghosts, and I will show you how a single dagger placed silently on a pillow stopped the world's greatest conquerors dead in their tracks. This is not just a story of murder. It is a masterclass in fear, manipulation, and the terrifying power of a broken mind. And if you stay with me until the final second, you will understand why the secret they carried is still the most dangerous weapon ever recorded in the archives of mankind. The year is 1090, and the medieval world is a volatile tapestry of warring empires, fractured caliphates, and blood-soaked crusades, but high in the jagged, unforgiving Elburz mountains of Persia, a man named Hassan-i-Sabbah was playing a game so dark it defied human logic. While sultans fought for land and gold, Hassan realized a fundamental truth that would change warfare forever. You don't need to defeat an army if you can simply delete the mind that commands it. He found his throne in Alamut, a fortress known as the Eagle's Nest, a place carved into a mountain peak so high and so steep that it seemed to touch the clouds themselves. It was impregnable, a stone tooth jutting out of the earth where no army could climb and no siege could survive the winter. But Hassan wasn't hiding from the world. He was building a factory of nightmares. He didn't want soldiers who fought for pay or glory. He wanted fidai, the ones who sacrifice. He needed men who didn't just accept death, but men who actively craved it as if it were the greatest gift imaginable. To achieve this, he didn't use speeches or money. He used a secret code of sensory manipulation that shattered the boundary between this life and the next. Hassan's secret weapon was a hidden garden, a masterpiece of sensory overload built deep within the forbidden stone walls of the fortress, invisible to anyone who wasn't initiated. It was an impossible oasis, a lush, vibrant Eden filled with flowing conduits of milk, honey, and wine, where exotic fruits hung from every branch and the air was thick with the scent of 1,000 crushed flowers. But the real trap was the inhabitants, the most breathtakingly beautiful women these young men had ever seen, trained in every art of pleasure, song, and dance. Hassan would select the most impressionable recruits and drug them with a potent, secret mixture of hashish, opium, and other mind-altering herbs that would plunge them into a deep, heavy coma. When they finally opened their eyes, the cold, gray stone of the fortress was gone, replaced by the warmth of this paradise. Their drugged minds, unable to distinguish hallucination from reality, genuinely believed they had died and crossed over into the afterlife. For a few glorious, intoxicating days, they lived in total ecstasy, convinced they were the chosen ones of God. Then, just as they reached the absolute peak of their happiness, Hassan would drug them again and throw them back into the cold, harsh, unforgiving reality of the dirt-floored barracks. This was the moment the secret code took hold of their souls. The psychological shock of being expelled from heaven back into the misery of the world was enough to break their sanity completely. These men weren't just soldiers anymore. They were addicts, not just to the chemicals, but to the divine vision they had tasted. They would weep, they would scream, and they would beg on their knees for a chance to go back. Hassan-i-Sabbah would then appear to them as a divine emissary, holding the keys to the gate they so desperately desired. He told them that the only way to return to that garden forever was through absolute, unquestioning obedience. He told them that their life was a worthless currency, and the only thing that had value was the mission. If they died while carrying out his orders, they wouldn't just be remembered, they would instantly wake up in the arms of the angels they had already met. In that singular, calculated moment of despair, the ultimate weapon was forged. These men didn't fear the executioner's axe, they saw it as the doorway to their true home. With his army of phantoms ready, the master of the mountain unleashed a reign of terror that completely paralyzed the ruling elite of the medieval world. The assassins didn't operate like any conventional military force history had ever seen. They didn't wear uniforms, and they didn't march in lines. They were the shadows behind the curtain, the silent breath in a crowded room. An assassin might spend 3, 5, or even 10 years posing as a humble stable boy, a devout monk, or a trusted servant in a sultan's inner circle. They possessed an inhuman level of patience, learning the languages, the customs, and the deepest fears of their targets until they became part of the furniture. And when the order finally came, the strike was never done in the dark of an alleyway where no one could see. They wanted the world to watch the blood spill because the assassination was just the medium. The message was the terror it inspired. When they struck down the great vizier Nizam al-Mulk, the most powerful man in the Seljuk Empire, the assassin did it in broad daylight in front of thousands of guards. He didn't even try to run. He stood over the bleeding body and smiled with a terrifying, serene joy as the guards hacked him to pieces. He wasn't dying. In his mind, he was finally waking up. This psychological warfare turned the most powerful men on earth into trembling wrecks who lived in a state of permanent, suffocating paranoia. Imagine the mental toll on a sultan who knows that his own food taster, his own bodyguard, or his own favorite musician might be a sleeper agent just waiting for a whisper from the mountain. Trust became a death sentence. Kings began wearing heavy chainmail underneath their silk robes at all times, even during prayer. They built iron cages to sleep in, surrounded by hundreds of lamps and guards who were forbidden from blinking, yet they still weren't safe. The assassins proved that no wall was high enough and no army was large enough to protect a man from an enemy who didn't want to survive. They effectively hacked the human instinct for self-preservation, turning the natural fear of death into a tactical disadvantage for their enemies. The secret code wasn't just about daggers. It was about the absolute, terrifying realization that the man standing next to you might be more than willing to die just to see you bleed. Even the legendary Saladin, the man who defeated the combined forces of the Third Crusade and reclaimed Jerusalem, was not immune to this shadow empire. Saladin was a man who feared no army on the battlefield, but the assassins were something else entirely. After 2 failed attempts on his life, Saladin became obsessed with wiping the order from the face of the earth. He marched his massive host to the gates of their Syrian strongholds, swearing to leave not one stone standing upon another. But the master of the mountain sent him a silent, chilling message that stopped the greatest general of the age dead in his tracks. One night, while Saladin slept in the very heart of his heavily fortified encampment, surrounded by his most elite and trusted Mamluk guards, an assassin slipped through the defenses like a ghost. When Saladin awoke the next morning, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a terrifying sight resting on his pillow, mere inches from his head. It was a poisoned dagger, pinned firmly through a piece of freshly baked bread that was only made in the assassin's mountain fortress. Beside it was a note that didn't make threats. It simply said, "What you think you possess is actually within our reach." Saladin, a man who had faced the might of Richard the Lionheart without flinching, was utterly defeated by a single piece of bread and a blade. He realized in that moment that he could conquer every city in the world, but he could never be safe as long as the master of the mountain allowed him to live. He immediately lifted the siege, marched his army away, and eventually formed a secret alliance with the very people he had sworn to destroy. The promise of invincibility was shattered. For nearly 200 years, the Order of Assassins maintained this terrifying stranglehold on the geopolitics of the Middle East. They became the ultimate wild card, taking contracts from both Muslim sultans and Christian crusaders, playing all sides against each other with a level of cold, calculated efficiency that made them the most feared entity in the known world. They were the original invisible empire, a state without borders that existed purely within the minds of those who feared them. But every empire of fear eventually meets a force that does not understand the language of fear. In the middle of the 13th century, a new shadow loomed from the east, the Mongols. Led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, The Mongol war machine was unlike anything the assassins had ever faced. The Mongols didn't care about psychological games, they didn't care about paradise, and they didn't care about the reputation of the master of the mountain. They didn't come to negotiate or to be intimidated, they came to erase. When the assassins tried their usual tactics of intimidation, the Mongols simply responded with massive, sophisticated siege engines and a level of absolute, mindless brutality that even the fighter eye couldn't manipulate. One by one, the impregnable mountain fortresses were pulverized into dust. In 1256, the Mongols finally breached the gates of Alamut. They systematically dismantled the stone walls, burned the legendary libraries that contained the secrets of their chemistry and philosophy, and slaughtered every member of the order they could find. The fake heaven was reduced to ash and rubble, and the secret code seemed to be lost to the winds of history. But did they really disappear, or did they just achieve a different kind of immortality? Think about the promise I made you at the beginning of this video. The Mongols destroyed their physical walls, but they could never destroy the psychological blueprint they left behind. The assassins didn't just leave behind ruins, they left behind a word that is now embedded in the DNA of almost every language on Earth. Every time a political leader is struck down in the shadows, every time a hidden agent changes the course of history with a single, calculated act, the ghost of Hassan-i-Sabbah is there, smiling from the darkness. Their legacy is the chilling realization that power is not just about how many soldiers you have, but about how much of your enemy's mind you can occupy. The secret code wasn't just a series of words or a drug, it was the realization that belief is the most potent weapon of mass destruction ever discovered. As you look at the world today with its digital manipulation, psychological operations, and ideological echo chambers, you have to ask yourself, is the fake heaven truly gone, or has it just moved from a mountain fortress in Persia into the screens we carry in our pockets? We live in a world where fear is still the most effective tool of control, and where a paradise is still promised to those who are willing to destroy themselves and others for a cause they don't fully understand. The fortress of Alamut is a pile of rocks, but the methods of the medieval assassins are more alive today than they were 1,000 years ago. I promised you that you would understand how they brought the world to its knees, and now you know. It wasn't the strength of their steel, but the absolute, terrifying control over the human mind. The secret code wasn't a mystery to be solved. It was a mirror that showed us how easily the human soul can be broken and rebuilt into a weapon. The story of the medieval assassins is a chilling reminder that the greatest fortress isn't made of stone, but of the stories we believe and the fears we cannot escape. They proved that a small group of committed individuals could derail the path of empires if they were willing to abandon their humanity in exchange for a dream. From the eagle's nest to the modern corridors of power, the shadow of the dagger remains constant. The master of the mountain may be dead, but his blueprint for terror is eternal. We are still living in the world they helped create, a world where the person standing next to you might be fighting for a paradise you cannot see. As we close the gates of history on Alamut, remember that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one standing in front of you with a sword, it's the one who has already convinced you that dying for his lie is the only way to truly live. Keep your eyes open, stay vigilant, and never forget that the shadows are always closer than they appear. The secret is out, but the fear is forever.